And when the priest raised the crucifix, the walls screamed. Not the family, the house, as if it was trying to drown them out. This is the real story behind the Conjuring 4 Last Rites, and it's more terrifying than anything Hollywood could make up. We're going to start this off in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, August 15th, 1985, at 11:47 p.m. Janet Smurl's breath fogs the bathroom mirror as she leans in a little bit closer. The porcelain sink is ice cold beneath her trembling fingers, and somewhere in the walls, that persistent drip echoes like a metronome counting down to something that she can't name. She's been standing here for 3 minutes now, toothbrush forgotten it was even in her hand, just staring at her reflection. Because 30 seconds ago, she heard something that should not be possible. Her own voice, whispering her name from inside that mirror.
Janet.
There it is again, clear as daylight, but her lips aren't moving. Her mouth is clamped shut so tight that her jaw aches. She presses her palm against the glass. It's warm. Glass shouldn't be warm at midnight in Pennsylvania in August. And right then, behind her reflection, something shifts. A shadow that doesn't belong to anything in that room. So Janet, stumbles backward, and that's when the mirror cracks. A single fracture line straight down the center, splitting her reflection into two. Now, what happened next would haunt the Smurl family for the next 13 years. It would attract the attention of the world's most famous paranormal investigators. It would inspire books, movies, and decades of debate. But most importantly, it would prove that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. This is the true story behind The Conjuring 4 Last Rites, and what you're about to hear makes the movie look like a bedtime story. Okay, so let's rewind now to 1974. Jack and Janet Smurl were living proof that the American dream was still alive. Jack, a Navy veteran with calloused hands and an honest work ethic, had just landed a good job as a technical specialist. And Janet, a devoted Catholic mother with infinite patience and a laugh that could fill a room, was raising their 4 daughters with the kind of love that builds strong families. When they bought the duplex at 328 Chase Street, it felt like destiny. The 2-family home was perfect. They would live on one side and Jack's parents would live on the other. 3 generations under connected roofs. Really cool. And they were building something, lasting in this little quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood where kids still played, kick the can until the streetlights came on. So Jack, he hammered the sold sign into the front yard himself. And Janet, she hung the curtains in the kitchen window, and the girls picked out wallpaper for their bedrooms. None of them noticed, though, that the previous owners had left. And not only that, they left in the middle of the night. And none of them really thought to ask why. The first sign that something was amiss came 3 weeks after they moved in. Jack was in the basement, checking, the water heater. And that's when he heard these little footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps right above his head. But the creepy thing is, Janet and the girls had gone grocery shopping, so he was alone in the house. But Jack called out anyway, "Hello? Janet?" Eerily, that's when the footsteps stopped. So he climbed the basement stairs 2 at a time, checking every room. Empty, all of them, empty. And he was actually so scared that he actually went to go reach for the phone and call the police. But that's when he heard the footsteps again. And I kid you not, this time they were in the basement, right where he had just been standing. Jack would later tell investigators that is the moment that he knew, deep in his gut, below, conscious thought. He understood that something had been waiting for them in that house. Something that had been alone for far too long. And that most importantly and eerily, something that was almost hungry. So as many of these hauntings that you see throughout the world, the problem started pretty small. The way cancer starts small. A dripping faucet, that defied every plumber in 3 counties. Water stains appeared overnight on walls where no pipes ran. And that persistent smell of stagnant water that seemed to seep from the very bones of the house. Janet would later describe it to reporters as the smell of something that had been underwater for far too long. But it was the sounds that really got to them, not footsteps. I mean, they actually got used to those. It was the whispering, conversations just below the threshold of understanding, like voices talking through water, almost coming from the bathroom, always at night. So clearly feeling almost threatened by this, Jack installed new locks, and Janet blessed the house with holy water 3 different times. And they told themselves that it was settling. It was just the house settling. Old pipes, their imagination. And they were lying to themselves. And somewhere in the dark corners of their minds, they knew it. Now, you could say this is when everything truly changed, because this is when the first actual physical manifestation happened. And it happened on a Tuesday. Janet was doing dishes when every piece of china in the cabinet, 43 pieces that had belonged to her grandmother, shattered simultaneously. Not fallen, shattered into perfect identical fragments that arranged themselves in a circle on the kitchen floor. Let me know in the comments right now if you stay in the house or if this is the moment where you leave. So that's when Jack came in, and Jack found her standing in the center of that circle, holding a dish rag, tears, just streaming down her face. "It's starting," she whispered. And even though she couldn't explain what she meant by that, she was right. Then in December 1985, the haunting escalated from whispers to warfare. And it all started with their dog, Pepper, who was a golden retriever mix who'd never shown fear of anything in his 8-year life. One morning, Janet found him cowering under the kitchen table, whimpering at something only that he could see. And when she tried to coax him out, Pepper's eyes tracked movement across the ceiling, back and forth, following something invisible to our eyes. And then even weirder, Pepper stopped eating, stopped sleeping, started standing guard outside the bathroom door, hackles raised, growling at the mirror. Okay guys, what I am about to mention next is very dark. So if you want to skip forward a minute, I wouldn't blame you. 3 days later, Jack found him at the bottom of the basement stairs, neck broken. But here's what still gives Jack nightmares. Pepper weighed 75 pounds. The basement door had been closed, and there were no footprints in the dust except for Jack's own footprints. Something had thrown their 75-pound dog down those stairs. Something strong enough to kill a 75-pound animal. Something that could open doors. That night, Janet was laying in bed when she felt it. Invisible hands wrapping around her ankles, pulling her towards the foot of the bed. She grabbed the headboard, screaming Jack's name, but the force was relentless. Her fingers slipped, and she slid 3 feet before whatever had a hold of her suddenly let go. And Jack found finger marks gouged into the wooden headboard. 4 parallel scratches an inch deep. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part had to be the laughter echoing from the bathroom mirror. Okay, and by February 1986, the Smurl family was absolutely living in hell. Jack had been attacked in his sleep so many times that he had stopped counting the bruises. Janet couldn't enter the bathroom without someone else in the house. Their daughters were having nightmares so vivid they would wake up screaming about drowning. Right there, that's when Janet made a phone call that would change everything. Hello, Mr. Warren? My name is Janet Smurl, and I think we need your help. Now, believe it or not, Ed and Lorraine Warren had investigated over 10,000 cases of paranormal activity. They'd seen possession, poltergeists, and things that would make grown men weep. But when Lorraine Warren stepped into 328 Chase Street on February 14th, 1986, she nearly collapsed before she even made it past the front door. Sidebar, guys, I know some of you might not like Ed or Lorraine Warren, or you might think they were charlatans or whatever you want to say. I've done a lot of research on this, and I'm just giving you guys the facts. You guys can argue about it in the comments, okay? And later, she would describe it to reporters. The oppression in that house was unlike anything we've encountered. It wasn't just one entity, it was multiple presences. And they were feeding off of each other, growing stronger, Lorraine said. And you gotta realize Ed Warren, a skeptical man who debunked more cases than he had confirmed, spent exactly 7 minutes in that house before declaring it authentic and dangerous. But it was actually Lorraine's assessment that chilled the family to the bone. Quote,
"There are 4 distinct entities here. One human spirit, angry and territorial. One demonic presence that's ancient and malevolent. And 2 others that I can't identify. They're not human, they're not demons, they're something else entirely."
She paused, staring at the bathroom door. And they're all connected to that mirror. Now, research into that house's history revealed what the real estate agent had failed to disclose. 328 Chase Street had been home to 7 different families in the past 30 years. Every single one of them had left unexpectedly, most of them in the middle of the night. The mirror in the upstairs bathroom had been there longer than anybody could remember. A massive antique with an ornate silver frame. It had, come with the house when it was built in 1896. And the weird thing is that previous owners even tried to remove it. But every time that they tried, something went wrong. Tools would break. Workers would quit. One family hired 3 different companies to take it down. And all 3 refused to return on the first day. So the mirror stayed. Lorraine Warren spent hours examining it, running her hands along the frame, pressing her palm against the glass. What she found made her recommend immediate evacuation of that house. She told the family, "This is not just a portal, it's an anchor. These entities aren't trapped here. They're choosing to stay. And as long as that mirror remains intact, they always will." But you see, this was reality, and the Smurls couldn't afford to just, pick up and move. They'd invested everything that they had into that house. Their entire life savings was tied up into those walls. So instead of running, they decided to fight. And it would be the worst decision that they ever made. Fast forward to Father McKenna arriving at their house on March 3rd, 1986. Carrying a worn leather case containing the tools of his trade. We had holy water, blessed salt, crucifixes, and a copy of the Roman rite of exorcism that was older than the house itself. He was a small man with gentle eyes and hands that shook slightly from decades of confronting evil. But when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute faith. "I've performed over 200 exorcisms," he told the family. "Some successful, some not. But I've never encountered resistance like this before we've even begun." Like all good rituals do, this one started at sunset. Father McKenna at that time blessed each room, sprinkling holy water, reciting prayers in Latin that echoed off the walls like ancient battle cries. And for the first hour, nothing happened. But then they entered the bathroom. The temperature dropped over 20 degrees in seconds. Their breath came out in visible puffs. The mirror began to vibrate, gently at first and then violently, rattling against the wall like something was pounding against it from the other side. And that's when Father McKenna raised his crucifix toward the mirror and began the formal rite of exorcism. And that's when the screaming started. But not from the family. From the walls themselves. A sound like metal being torn apart, like children drowning, like every nightmare that you've ever given a voice to. And if that doesn't spook you enough at that moment, the lights went out. And in the darkness, something grabbed Janet by the shoulders and lifted her 3 feet off the ground. When Jack, went and tried to reach her, invisible claws raked across his chest, drawing blood through his t-shirt. Father McKenna, he never stopped praying, even when the mirror cracked, even when blood began seeping from the walls, even when a voice that wasn't human began laughing from inside the glass. The exorcism that night lasted 4 hours, and when it was over, Father McKenna collapsed in the hallway, sobbing. "It's not gone," he whispered. "It's stronger. I made it stronger." And you may think it's a joke about what he just said, but what he just said was scary, and it was scary because he was right. What followed was 13 years of escalating torment that would push the Smurl family to the very edge of sanity. Jack began, losing time. He'd find himself standing in the backyard at 3 a.m., barefoot in the snow with no memory of how he got there. Security cameras the family installed would show him walking through the house in the middle of the night. But his eyes were wrong. They weren't his eyes. Janet started sleeping with a tape recorder next to her bed. The recordings reveal hours of her own voice having conversations with something that never responded. She would speak to empty air for entire nights, discussing things that she had no memory of saying. And their daughters began exhibiting behavior that terrified even experienced child psychologists. The youngest would draw pictures of people who weren't there. The oldest would wake up speaking fluent Latin, a language she never even touched. And through it all, the mirror was there and it watched, reflecting things that were not in the room, showing faces that belonged to none of the living. As you can imagine, at this point, neighbors began avoiding the house altogether. Mail carriers refused to deliver it to the front door. The family's closest friends stopped visiting after a dinner party where every guest witnessed the dining room table lift 4 feet off the ground and hover there for 23 minutes. And the Smurls documented everything. Times, dates, photographs, audio recordings. They filled 17 notebooks with accounts of paranormal activity, police reports, medical examinations, sworn statements from witnesses, and still no one believed them. In 1987, desperate for help, Janet went public, and the story exploded. Family claims demonic possession, Pennsylvania House of Horrors. Reporters descended like vultures. Janet calmly described being SA'd by invisible entities. Jack showed medical documentation of unexplainable injuries. Their daughters tried to explain what it was like living where bedtime meant time for terror. And the family received thousands of letters, offering some support. Others contained death threats from people who believed that they were mocking religion. But the worst letters came from other families, dozens of them, all describing similar experiences, and all asking the same question: how do we make it stop? And the Smurls couldn't answer because they didn't know. In 1988, after 14 years of torment, the Smurls finally had enough money to move. They found a small house across town, so they packed their belongings and left 328 Chase Street forever. And for exactly 3 weeks, their lives were totally normal. But then, it followed them. Yep, the new house began exhibiting the same phenomena, but worse. It was learning, adapting, growing stronger. The family then realized the horrible truth. They'd accidentally brought the mirror with them. Janet had wrapped it in blankets and stored it in their new garage. 3 days after moving in, their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on the door. "Hi, I heard you guys talking to somebody in your garage last night," she said. "But when I looked, you were alone, and there were 2 voices, though." Janet's blood went cold. She'd been in the garage the night before, alone, Or so she thought. This harassment continued for 5 more years. Different house, same hell. The entity seemed to enjoy the game now, letting them think they were safe before striking again. After the failed exorcism, the Warrens convinced the Smurl family to let them remove the mirror from 328 Chase Street, not to destroy it. They'd learned that breaking cursed objects often makes them more dangerous, but to contain it. So the mirror was transported to the Warren Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut, where it's remained for decades, surrounded by thousands of other haunted artifacts. It's found a new home. But it did not find peace, because for years the museum was closed to overnight visitors. It was too dangerous, the Warrens said. Too many people had had bad experiences. But here's what will give you chills. You might have seen this in the news, but recently the Warren Occult Museum was purchased by comedian Matt Rife and YouTuber Elton Castee, creator of TFIL and The Overnight Channel. I'm a big fan of both. And starting November 1st, they're opening it for overnight stays. That means you can spend the night in the same building as the Smurl mirror. You can stand in front of the glass that tormented a family for 13 years. And not only is the mirror there, remember, from the second one, you got the dinosaur. And from all the Annabelle movies, you got Annabelle. And The Conjuring, Last Rites tells, Hollywood's version of the story. But the real mirror, the one that started it all, is waiting in Monroe, Connecticut. And now, you can go look into it for yourself. But just remember, when you stare into that mirror, it stares back. And it remembers everyone who's ever taken a look. Janet Smurl learned that the hard way. I guess the real question is, will you?